The acrid scent of burnt moon petal clung to Elias Thorne's robes like a personal failure, a stark reminder of his current predicament. The cauldron before him, meant to simmer with a vibrant, emerald hue, instead bubbled with a viscous, sludge-gray concoction, occasionally spitting noxious purple fumes. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his hand as he clutched his wand, a slender willow wood etched with ancestral runes that felt heavier than lead. "Thorne." Professor Eldridge's voice, a dry rasp like parchment dragged over stone, cut through the steamy din of the potions classroom. Another failed draft of tranquility. "At this rate, Mr. Thorne, your magical aptitude reports will read less like a student's progress and more like a cautionary tale." Elias flinched, the words echoing the deep-seated doubts that gnawed at him. He was a Thorne, a name whispered with a certain reverence in some magical circles, albeit one tracing back to distant squib ancestors. The pressure to prove his magical worth, to show he wasn't a fluke, had been a constant companion since he first stepped foot onto Eldoria Academy's hallowed grounds. He excelled in charms, navigated transfiguration with intuitive grace, and even aced ancient runes. But potions. Potions was a gaping, cauldron-sized hole in his magical soul. It was a rigid, unforgiving science of precise measurements, exact timings, and ancient recipes that demanded an unwavering adherence he simply couldn't muster. His magic, vibrant and alive in other subjects, felt throttled, trapped within the confines of a brewing textbook. Seraphina Vance, her own cauldron emitting a steady, perfectly pearlescent glow, shot him a quick, disdainful glance from across the room. Her meticulously braided hair didn't have a single strand out of place, much like her academic record. She embodied the traditional wizarding ideal, excelling effortlessly where Elias stumbled. He knew what she thought. He was a dilettante, relying on vague feelings rather than proper magical discipline. Sometimes, he feared she was right. "Class dismissed," Eldridge announced, surveying the room with a weary sigh. "Next week, we shall attempt the antidote to common poisons. I expect better, particularly from those of you on academic probation." His gaze lingered pointedly on Elias. The words landed like a fresh drop of venom, stinging with renewed shame. Academic probation. In potions. It was a blight on his record, a glaring red mark that threatened to extinguish the last embers of his once sparkling magical enthusiasm. As students packed away their wands and vials, a small, ethereal figure with a perpetually curious expression drifted over to Elias. "Rough one, huh, Elias?" Lunawid Finch, a fellow student from another house, nudged his arm gently. Her silvery blue eyes, always seeming to hold a hidden sparkle, met his with genuine empathy. "That draft is notoriously finicky. Mine looked like liquid snot for a while there." She gestured to her own potion, which, while not perfect, was a respectable pale green. Elias managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Lunawood. But I think mine achieved a new level of alchemical horror." He sighed, scrubbing at a stubborn scorch mark on his workbench. "I just don't get it. It feels like I'm trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the other half are upside down." Lunawood's brows furrowed slightly. "Maybe it's not about finding all the pieces, Elias. Maybe it's about seeing the picture first, even if it's just a blur." Her whimsical words, often bordering on cryptic, sometimes offered a strange comfort. Just as Elias was about to respond, Professor Eldridge cleared his throat, commanding the lingering student's attention. "A moment, if you please. I have an announcement regarding the future of this particular subject." He straightened his robes, a rarely seen flicker of emotion, perhaps relief, perhaps concern, crossing his stern face. "Effective immediately, I am retiring from my post as potions master. It is with mixed feelings that I announce my successor, a wizard of considerable renown and unconventional methods." Eldridge paused, as if bracing for impact. "Please welcome Dr. Stephen Strange." A ripple of murmurs spread through the classroom. "Strange? Who's Strange? Is he related to the Sorcerer Supreme? Unconventional methods? What does that even mean?" Before the whispers could fully erupt, the classroom doors, heavy oak etched with protective wards, swung open, not with a creak, but with a silent, almost theatrical flourish. A figure stepped in. He wasn't what Elias expected. Not the wizened, cloaked, or even flamboyant wizard typically associated with Eldoria's esteemed faculty. Dr. Stephen Strange was different. He stood tall, cloaked in robes of deep blue and crimson that seemed to flow with an inner light, adorned with intricate, unfamiliar golden embroidery. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, framing an angular face dominated by piercing blue-green eyes that seemed to hold millennia of secrets. A subtle, almost imperceptible arcane energy pulsed around him, making the very air in the room crackle. He held no wand, no textbook, just an aura of quiet, potent power. "Good afternoon, class." Strange's voice was a low, resonant baritone, rich with an unexpected warmth that immediately silenced the remaining whispers. "Professor Eldridge, thank you for the introduction." He offered a slight, acknowledging nod. Eldridge, looking distinctly uncomfortable, merely grunted in response before making a hasty exit, leaving the class to the new master. Strange's gaze swept over the room, settling for a moment on Elias, then Seraphina, then Lunawood, as if assessing not just their faces, but the very essence behind them. When his eyes met Elias's again, there was a flicker, a spark of something Elias couldn't decipher. Not judgment, not pity, but recognition. It made the hairs on Elias's neck prickle. "I am Dr. Stephen Strange, and I will be your new potions master," he announced, his voice carrying an authority that was both ancient and utterly contemporary. He walked to the front, not to the traditional podium, but to stand directly before the blackboards. With a casual flick of his wrist, vibrant orange sigils flared into existence, not chalk dust, but pure arcane energy, sketching complex, geometric patterns that pulsed with an otherworldly light. For too long, the art of potion making has been relegated to a rigid set of rules. Strange began, his eyes sweeping across the astonished faces of the students. A science of precise measurements, sterile ingredients, and rote memorization. While precision has its place, it is but a single facet of a multidimensional truth. He paused, the sigils swirling and reforming behind him. True brewing, I contend, is not merely chemistry. It is alchemy. It is an understanding of the very fabric of existence. Every ingredient, from a humble sprig of mint to the rarest dragon scale, possesses not just chemical properties, but a unique vibrational essence, a mystical resonance. Elias exchanged a bewildered glance with Lunawood, who, surprisingly, looked less confused and more intrigued. Seraphina Vance, however, had her jaw set, a look of profound skepticism etched on her face. "You see, a cauldron is not merely a vessel," Strange continued, his voice taking on a hypnotic rhythm. "It is a crucible of transformation. And the brewer? The brewer is not merely a technician. The brewer is a conduit, an interpreter, a sculptor of raw magical energy. Your intent, your focus, your intuition, these are as crucial as any perfectly weighed gram of powdered newt spleen." He gestured to the sigils, which coalesced into a shimmering, holographic diagram of a potion, but instead of chemical formulae, it showed pulsating energy flows and interconnected mystical symbols. We will delve into the spirit of the ingredient, not just its form. We will explore the mystical ley lines that crisscross Eldoria, understanding how they influence the potency of your brew. We will learn to listen to the potion, to feel its energy, to guide its transformation with your mind, your will, your very soul. Elias felt a strange tightening in his chest. Listen to the potion? Feel its energy? It sounded like madness, completely at odds with everything he'd ever been taught. Yet, a tiny, rebellious spark flickered within him. This was what he'd yearned for, unknowingly. A break from the rigid confines, a different perspective that might just accommodate his own wild, often uncontrollable magical intuition. Seraphina raised a perfectly manicured hand, her voice sharp with barely concealed disdain. "Dr. Strange, with all due respect, are you suggesting we abandon centuries of established alchemical principles? Are we to simply feel our way through a healing draft, ignoring tried-and-true recipes for some nebulous, mystical resonance?" Strange turned to her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "A fair question, Miss Vance. And no, not abandon. Integrate. The meticulous science, the ancient recipes, these are the bones. But without the breath, without the spirit, they are merely inert forms. We shall learn both the bones and the breath. His gaze lingered on Seraphina, then swept back to Elias, a silent message passing between them. Your first assignment will be unconventional, Strange announced, the sigils dissolving into shimmering dust. There will be no cauldrons today. No wands. Only yourselves. Over the next week, I want each of you to find a single, naturally occurring ingredient within the Eldoria grounds, a leaf, a stone, a drop of dew, a single blade of grass. You will not process it, not alter it. You will simply spend time with it, observe it, and more importantly, feel it. Understand its essence. What story does it tell? What magical signature does it carry? The class erupted into confused whispers. Feel a blade of grass? What kind of potions class was this? Strange held up a hand, silencing them instantly. On your honor, you will not consult textbooks or older students or the library. This is an exercise in pure, unadulterated intuition. Next week, you will present your chosen ingredient and, more importantly, your personal interpretation of its mystical essence. There will be no right or wrong answer, only authenticity. He paused, his eyes gleaming with an ancient wisdom. Your grade will depend not on the accuracy of your observation, but on the depth of your understanding of its true, mystical self. Class dismissed. The words hung in the air, a challenge and an enigma. Elias stood frozen, his mind reeling. A story from a stone? A magical signature from a leaf? It was utterly bonkers. Yet, as he finally gathered his things, a strange feeling settled over him. For the first time in a potions class, he wasn't filled with despair. He was filled with a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating sense of possibility. What if Lunawood was right? What if it wasn't about finding the pieces, but seeing the picture first? And what if, just maybe, this Dr. Strange could teach him how to see it? The question pulsed in his mind, demanding an answer that only a whisper of intuition could provide. The air in the Eldoria Academy potions lab, usually thick with the metallic tang of cauldron steel and the acrid bite of caustic fumes, now carried a strange, almost ethereal undercurrent. It was less about the specific ingredients bubbling in the dozens of cauldrons, and more about the shift in atmosphere, a subtle vibration that Elias Thorne couldn't quite name. He gripped his stirring rod, his knuckles white, attempting to coax the murky gray liquid in his own cauldron into the shimmering silver described in the basic elixir of clarity recipe. Professor Strange's words echoed in his mind, maddeningly vague. Don't just measure, Mr. Thorne. Feel. Listen to the ingredient. What does its essence tell you? Does it yearn for heat, or does it recoil? Does it wish to be gently folded, or stirred with decisive intent? Elias tried. He really did. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration, attempting to discern the yearning of the powdered moon petal he was supposed to add next. All he felt was the faint tingle of finely ground botanicals against his fingertips. He added a pinch, then another, ignoring the precise measure of 3.7 grams specified in the standard textbook. His brew, instead of lightening, merely swirled with a deeper, more ominous gray. A thin wisp of sickly green smoke curled from the surface. A sigh escaped him, heavy with a familiar despair. This was it. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the proof that Strange's radical methods were just another avenue for his spectacular failure. Traditional potions left him adrift in a sea of rigid rules. Intuitive potions left him drowning in a fog of nebulous concepts. He was magically inept, period. The thought felt like a cold stone settling in his gut. Attempting to commune with your brew, Thorne, a sharp, cultured voice cut through the lab's low hum. Elias flinched, nearly dropping his stirring rod. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. Seraphina Vance. Her cauldron, a few stations down, emitted a soft, steady glow, its contents already a perfect, vibrant silver. She stood beside it, her posture impeccable, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant braid. She hadn't even bothered to don her protective gloves, a testament to her unwavering precision and control. Just trying to understand the process, Elias mumbled, refusing to meet her gaze. He focused intently on the sickly green smoke, as if he might intimidate it into dissipating. Seraphina moved closer, her footsteps light but deliberate, each one echoing with judgment. She peered into his cauldron, her perfectly arched eyebrow rising. Understanding? This looks more like an interpretive dance of disaster. Professor Strange's unique philosophies might appeal to those struggling with fundamental magical principles, but surely even you can see the empirical evidence before you. She gestured with a graceful sweep of her hand, first at his bubbling mess, then at her own pristine elixir. One is the result of focused study, precise execution, and a respect for established magical tenets. The other looks like a fungal infection trying to escape a murky pond. A wave of heat flushed through Elias's cheeks. Her words, delivered with a cool, detached superiority, stung worse than any direct insult. She wasn't just mocking his current failure, she was subtly dismantling Strange's entire approach, and by extension, Elias's last desperate hope for success. Perhaps, Elias retorted, trying to inject some bravado into his voice, there's more to it than just rote memorization, Vance. Maybe the true magic comes from, he trailed off, realizing he had no actual argument. What did Strange say? The brewer's intent? The essence? It all sounded like fanciful nonsense when confronted with Seraphina's perfectly brewed potion. Seraphina merely smiled, a thin, pitying curve of her lips. Of course, Thorne. The true magic. I'm sure your intuitively brewed fungal infection will prove highly therapeutic for something. She turned away, a subtle flick of her wrist adjusting the flame beneath her cauldron, a silent demonstration of her mastery. Elias slumped against his workbench, the weight of her disdain pressing down on him. She was right. He was a joke. His gaze drifted around the lab, seeing other students, mostly those who, like Seraphina, were excelling under the old paradigm, producing perfectly colored, precisely textured brews. Strange's methods seemed to have little appeal beyond the struggling few, and even among them, none looked as lost as Elias felt. Just then, a presence materialized at the head of the lab. Professor Strange. He moved with an almost unnerving fluidity, his crimson robes swaying around him like a silent current. His silver-streaked hair seemed to absorb the ambient light, and his eyes, deep and knowing, scanned the room, lingering for a moment on Seraphina's flawless elixir, then on Elias's bubbling green disaster. He didn't frown, didn't comment. He simply observed, a faint, almost imperceptible hum seeming to emanate from him. A spirited exchange, I perceive, Strange said, his voice calm, resonant, cutting through the lab's murmuring with an authority that wasn't loud, but absolute. He walked towards Elias's station, his gaze unwavering. Mr. Thorne, you're attempting to listen to the whisper of the moon petal. Commendable. Elias blinked. He hadn't thought of it that way. He just thought he was floundering. It's not going well, Professor. It mostly just screams failure at me. Strange chuckled, a low, warm sound. He leaned over the cauldron, not touching it, but simply observing. The green smoke seemed to recede slightly under his scrutiny. The ingredient does not scream failure, Mr. Thorne. It simply speaks in a language you have yet to fully comprehend. You are trying to force it into a conversation it is not ready for, or perhaps, in a dialect it does not understand. He glanced at Seraphina, who was now watching with an air of barely concealed impatience. Miss Vance, your elixir of clarity is, as expected, a masterpiece of precise application. You have mastered the syntax of traditional potion making. Seraphina's chest puffed out almost imperceptibly. Thank you, Professor. The established methods rarely lead one astray. Strange nodded slowly. Indeed. But a language, no matter how precise, can only convey so much if one cannot grasp the underlying narrative. To truly master the magical arts, one must become fluent not just in the words, but in the stories behind them. He turned back to Elias, his eyes gleaming with an arcane light. Mr. Thorne, for your next assignment, you will set aside the conventional cauldron for a time. Your task is not to brew, but to read. Elias frowned. Read, Professor? Precisely. Strange waved a hand, and from a nearby cabinet, a wooden box, unadorned and ancient, floated towards them. It settled gently on Elias's workbench. Inside this box, you will find 10 vials. Each contains a raw, unprocessed magical ingredient. Some are common, some are exceedingly rare. Your mission, Mr. Thorne, is to discern their true nature. Not just their names or their physical properties, but their essence. What are their magical lineages? What stories do they carry within their molecular structure and their ethereal energies? Do they resonate with creation or destruction? With healing or decay? What unique magical signature do they possess, far beyond what any textbook might describe? Seraphina scoffed. Professor, with all due respect, that sounds less like potions and more like divination or some archaic form of spiritualism. We have identification spells and alchemical analyses for such tasks. Indeed, Miss Vance, Strange replied, his tone unwavering. And those tools are invaluable for understanding the what. But they often fall short in revealing the why and the how on a deeper, more intuitive plane. They quantify, but they do not always empathize. The goal here is to perceive the magical signature, the unique frequency of each component, with your innate magical senses, not merely with an incantation or a chemical reaction. He turned back to Elias. For this, you will use no tools, no wands, no spells beyond your own focused intent. You will meditate with each vial. You will touch it, feel its resonance, listen to the silent hum of its power. You will articulate its story in detail. Elias stared at the unassuming wooden box, then at the professor. This was utterly unlike anything he'd ever been asked to do. It was terrifying, yet a tiny spark of something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a burgeoning hope, flickered within him. It bypassed all the rules he'd failed at, all the measurements he couldn't master. It was different. How will I know if I'm doing it right? Elias asked, his voice barely a whisper. Strange's eyes crinkled at the corners. You won't, initially. You will trust your intuition. You will feel for the truth, even when your mind doubts it. This is not about being correct, Mr. Thorne, but about being perceptive. About allowing your magical self to awaken and perceive what the rigid structure of traditional magic often obscures. It is about understanding the raw magic that flows through all things, the very fabric of existence, before it is distilled into an elixir or confined within an incantation. He paused, then added, your initial reports will likely be filled with conjecture and error. That is expected. The path to intuitive mastery is paved with honest mistakes, not with the sterile perfection of a formula. But I believe you possess a unique resonance for this task, Mr. Thorne. A sensitivity that has been overshadowed by the expectations of a different magical discipline. Seraphina let out a small, derisive snort, clearly disbelieving. A unique resonance for guessing. Charming. Strange ignored her, his gaze fixed on Elias. I want you to write down your impressions, your sensations, the stories each ingredient tells you. Describe their spiritual essence, their potential uses, their symbiotic relationships with other magical components. Allow your mind to wander, to connect, to intuit. He placed a hand, surprisingly warm and firm, on Elias's shoulder. This is not about the precision of the hand, but the precision of the soul, Mr. Thorne. Do you accept this challenge? The familiar knot of self-doubt tightened in Elias's stomach, but beneath it, that flicker of curiosity had grown into a small, steady flame. This wasn't about failing a potion. This was about discovering something new, something that might finally speak to him in a language he could understand. It was a chance to finally, truly, find his own magic. He looked at the mysterious wooden box, then at the unwavering gaze of his new mentor. Yes, Professor, Elias said, a newfound resolve hardening his voice. I accept. Strange smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. Excellent. Let the journey begin. You have until next week's lesson to present your findings. And remember, the truest insights often emerge when you least expect them. As Strange turned and melted back into the shadows at the head of the lab, Seraphina shot Elias a look that combined disdain with outright suspicion. But Elias barely noticed. He carefully lifted the lid of the wooden box. Inside, nestled in velvet, were 10 small, stoppered vials. Each contained a distinct substance, a shimmering dust, a crystal shard, a twisted rootlet, a single feather that seemed to pulse with faint light. He picked up the first vial, a tiny sphere of obsidian-like stone, smooth and cool against his fingertips. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to feel it. The task felt monumental, impossible. Yet, as he held it, he swore he felt a faint, almost imperceptible thrum, like a distant heartbeat. A story waiting to be told. But how to listen? How to translate? The path ahead was murky, but for the first time in his magical education, Elias felt a flicker of genuine excitement, not dread. He was stepping into the unknown, and perhaps into himself. The verdant breath of Eldoria's greenhouses was usually a balm to Elias's often frayed nerves, a symphony of rustling leaves and the earthy scent of arcane flora. Today, however, even the cheerful chirrup of a baby mandrake couldn't soothe his persistent frustration. He held a sprig of lumina lily, its petals glowing faintly even in the filtered light, trying to read its essence, as Professor Strange had instructed. Feel its story, Thorne, strange calm, resonant voice echoed in his mind. Its journey from seed to bloom, its connection to the moon's pull, the energy it draws from the very earth. Elias closed his eyes, concentrating. He focused on the lily, on its fragile stem, its delicate bloom. He felt green, and a bit flowery, and utterly unenlightened. It was like trying to hear a whispered secret in a roaring waterfall. The scientific part of his brain screamed for a measurement, a specific property, a quantifiable data point. But Strange wanted intuition, a nebulous feeling. "This is maddening," he muttered, opening his eyes and sighing dramatically. He poked the lily's petal. "What story are you telling, you glowy thing? Is it about photosynthesis? Because I know that one." A soft, melodic giggle drifted from behind a towering Venus flytrap that thankfully wasn't interested in him. "Perhaps its story is not for your ears, Elias, but for your soul to perceive." Elias turned to see Loonwood Finch emerging from the dense foliage, her moss-green robes blending with the surroundings, a whimsical smile gracing her lips. Her usually chaotic mass of curly auburn hair was today adorned with a single, perfectly symmetrical fern frond, lending her an even more ethereal air. "Lunawood," Elias exclaimed, feeling a surge of relief at her presence. She had a way of cutting through his self-doubt with gentle honesty. "Don't tell me you understand this essence reading nonsense either." She walked towards him, her steps light, like a forest sprite's. "Nonsense? It's simply another language, Elias. One we've forgotten how to speak." She reached for his hand, gently taking the lumina lily. Her fingers, cool and slender, brushed his, sending a faint tingle up his arm. "Think of it this way," she began, her gaze fixed on the lily, yet somehow seeming to look beyond it. "When you see a friend, you don't measure their height or the color of their eyes to know it's them, do you? You simply know them. Their presence, their spirit. An ingredient is much the same. Its magical essence is its spirit." Elias frowned, considering this. "So, I'm supposed to feel the lily's spirit." "Precisely." Lunawood smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Close your eyes again. Don't think. Just allow." She placed the lily back in his hand, her own hand lingering over his for a moment. He took a deep breath, the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms filling his lungs. He focused on the lily, pushing away the logical objections, the need to quantify. He tried to remember how he felt when he was truly comfortable, truly himself, not Elias Thorne, the failing potion student, but just Elias. He let that feeling expand, like a gentle ripple, towards the lumina lily. This time, something was different. The faint glow in his hand seemed to pulse, not just with light, but with something internal, a gentle thrum. He felt a delicate vibrancy, a sense of nurturing energy, like moonlight distilled into a physical form. It wasn't a thought or a word, but a pure sensation of serene strength, of gentle illumination. It felt hopeful. A gasp escaped his lips. His eyes flew open. I felt it, Lunawood. It's like soft starlight, a quiet reassurance. Like it wants to help, to heal, to bring clarity. Lunawood beamed. "See? You can speak the language. Your intuition isn't broken, Elias. It's merely been silenced by too many rules and too much doubt. She squeezed his hand encouragingly. You simply needed to remember how to listen. For the first time in weeks, Elias felt a genuine spark of hope, a warmth blossoming in his chest that had nothing to do with the greenhouse's humid air. Strange methods, once so alien, were starting to make a strange, beautiful sense. Their moment of quiet triumph, however, was soon interrupted by an unexpected urgency that began to ripple through the academy. It started subtly. A student in the Great Hall, during breakfast, stumbled and dropped his spoon, a spark of faint, green light sputtering from his fingertips before vanishing. He looked pale, complaining of a sudden drain of energy. Later that day, during Charm's class, a Ravenclaw known for her impeccable wand work found her lumos, charm flickering erratically, illuminating nothing but a sickly gray glow. By evening, the whispers turned into concerned murmurs. Another student, a Hufflepuff, burst into tears during herbology, claiming she couldn't feel the plant's intentions anymore, a sentiment that usually came as naturally to her as breathing. She described a dull ache behind her eyes and a persistent feeling of static in her magical core, as if her inner wellspring was clogged. The next morning, the malady had undeniably spread. Several students appeared in the infirmary, not with common colds or minor potion burns, but with a terrifying array of symptoms. Their complex magical tattoos pulsed erratically or faded completely. Their wand movements became sluggish. As if fighting an unseen resistance, their usual vibrant auras appeared muted, even bruised. Headmaster Eldrin, a man usually as unshakable as the Academy's ancient foundations, had a furrow in his brow that seemed carved deeper than usual. It's like their magic is rebelling against them, a concerned Professor Vector, the arithmancy instructor, observed during an emergency faculty meeting. Or being actively suppressed, Professor Trelawney added, her usually cloudy gaze sharper with fear. The threads of destiny, they are tangled, dimmed. A pall falls over our future, I sense it. The infirmary, usually a quiet haven of healing and rest, became a chaotic hub. Madame Pomfrey, Eldoria's no-nonsense mediwitch, bustled about, her usual efficiency strained. She administered revitalizing potions, soothing salves, diagnostic charms, everything in her vast arsenal. But nothing worked. The students remained afflicted, their magical essence seemingly leaching away. Elias saw Seraphina Vance in the corridor, her face a mask of barely concealed panic. She clutched her transfiguration textbook, her knuckles white. Even her, the unflappable star student, seemed rattled. He overheard her muttering to a friend, "It's unprecedented. Never in the Academy's history has such a widespread magical affliction occurred. Perhaps it's a consequence of radical magical experimentation within these very walls, destabilizing the ancient wards." Her gaze darted pointedly towards the potions classroom, a clear, unspoken accusation against Strange. He felt a pang of indignation on Strange's behalf, but the fear was contagious. What if Seraphina was right? What if Strange's methods, for all their intriguing potential, had somehow upset the delicate balance of Eldoria's magic? Days bled into a week, and the situation only worsened. The halls, usually vibrant with student chatter and the hum of casual magic, grew quiet, shadowed by anxiety. Laughter was rare. Spellwork in classes was hesitant, often failing outright. The infirmary overflowed, forcing temporary beds to be set up in the unused lower library wing. Headmaster Eldrin finally called a general assembly, his voice, amplified by a sonorous charm, echoing through the great hall, which felt unusually empty despite the hundreds of students present. His face was grim. "Students, faculty," he began, his gaze sweeping over the anxious faces. "I regret to inform you that the mysterious malady affecting many of your peers continues to baffle our most experienced healers. We have exhausted every known traditional remedy, every diagnostic charm, every counterspell, and healing potion in Eldoria's venerable archives." A collective gasp went through the hall, followed by a murmur of fearful whispers. The headmaster admitting defeat? It was unheard of. The affliction appears to target the very core of one's magical being, Eldrin continued, his voice heavy, dulling their ability to channel, to perceive, to be magical. It is not infectious in the traditional sense, but spreads through an unknown magical vector, weakening the magical energy of our most magically sensitive students first. He paused, his gaze then settling on Professor Stephen Strange, who stood silently at the end of the faculty table, his usual crimson robes somehow seeming even more vibrant against the muted anxiety of the room. Strange met the headmaster's gaze with an unreadable expression, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in his eyes. It is a malady unlike any we have faced before, Eldrin concluded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet resonating with gravitas. And it demands an unconventional solution. Professor Strange. All eyes, including Elias's, snapped to the new potions master. A hush fell over the hall, thick with dread and desperate hope. Strange's presence in the assembly had been a quiet one, almost an observer. Now he was the sole focus. Professor Strange, Headmaster Eldrin repeated, his voice gaining a new, desperate edge. Do you have any insights into this strain? Any ideas, no matter how unorthodox? Strange stepped forward, his movements fluid and deliberate, the silence in the hall absolute. He surveyed the hundreds of faces, his gaze lingering for a moment on Elias, then on Seraphina, before sweeping across the afflicted students. A faint, almost imperceptible frown creased his brow. Headmaster, Strange said, his voice cutting through the tension, clear and resonant. I believe I may. It appears to be a parasitic magical entity, feeding on raw magical essence. A creature of pure, negative intent, weaving itself into the very fabric of our students' cores. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. And traditional magic, which works by adding or subtracting, cannot simply remove it. We must outweed it. We must craft something that speaks its own forgotten language, a counter-essence that will not fight it, but transmute it. His eyes, ancient and piercing, fixed on Headmaster Eldrin. And I know just the student who might be capable of brewing such a solution. The air in Eldoria Academy, usually vibrant with youthful magical energy, now felt heavy, tinged with an unnerving pallor. Another half-dozen students had succumbed to the creeping malady overnight, their usually bright auras flickering erratically, their eyes glazed with a profound weariness no amount of sleep could banish. Panic, a cold and insistent dread, had begun to grip the faculty, their traditional magical remedies proving as useful as a broken wand. Healers bustled through the corridors, wands waving in desperate diagnostic sweeps, but the afflictions stubbornly defied their most ancient incantations. Professor Strange, however, moved with an uncharacteristic calm, his gaze sweeping the increasingly frantic Great Hall. He found Elias hunched over a forgotten breakfast roll, staring into the depths of his half-eaten porridge as if searching for answers in its lukewarm surface. Thorne, Strange's voice, a low hum that cut through the cacophony of worried whispers, drew Elias's attention. Elias looked up, startled, his heart doing a frantic flutter against his ribs. He'd barely slept, the images of his classmates, pale and listless, haunting his thoughts. Strange gestured for him to follow, leading him not to the potions lab, but to a secluded corner of the library, shelves stacked high with tomes of forgotten lore. The faculty's traditional methods are failing, Strange began, his voice devoid of judgment, merely stating a fact. This malady is not of a common magical strain. It feeds on the essence of magic itself, dulling the core connection a wizard possesses. It requires a counteragent that resonates with that fundamental essence, not merely its symptoms. Elias swallowed, a dry rasp in his throat. But what does that mean, Professor? Strange fixed him with an intense gaze, one that seemed to peel back layers of Elias's doubt. It means, Thorne, that it requires a brew born not of rote memorization, but of an intuitive understanding of magical energies. A brew that only someone attuned to the subtle vibrations of essence can create. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. I am assigning you this task, Thorne. You will brew the counter potion. The words struck Elias like a physical blow. Him? The perennial potions failure? The very thought sent a wave of nausea washing over him. Me, Professor? But I'm still struggling with the basics. Seraphina Vance, she's miles ahead. She's always. Seraphina is an exemplary student of traditional potions. Strange interrupted, his tone firm. But her path is not your path. Her mind, while brilliant, is too rigidly confined by the known. This malady lies beyond the known. Your unique approach, your ability to feel the essence of ingredients, is precisely what is needed. He laid a small, leather-bound book, ancient and worn, on the table. This contains obscure theories on essential magic. And these, he pulled a small, iridescent pouch from his robe, spilling 3 peculiar items onto the table: a shimmering feather that pulsed with a faint, internal light, a shard of crystal that seemed to absorb and refract every ambient color, and a tiny, dried flower that exuded a surprisingly potent, earthy scent. These are the core ingredients: feather of the astral crow, heartstone shard, bloom of the verdant vale. Each possesses a powerful, unique magical signature. Your task is not merely to combine them, but to coax their essences into a harmonious resonance, guided by your intuition, to create a restorative balm for the magical core. Elias stared at the items, then at Strange, a whirlwind of fear and a fledgling spark of wonder warring within him. This wasn't just a challenge, it was an act of profound trust. Strange wasn't just asking him to brew a potion, he was asking him to become the brewer he was meant to be. I don't know if I can, Professor, Elias admitted, his voice barely a whisper. You do not know if you will try, Thorne, Strange corrected softly. But I know you can. The clock is ticking. You have 3 days. 3 days. It felt like an eternity and a blink. Elias retreated to a secluded, rarely used corner of the main potions lab, a space Strange had quietly designated for him. He spent the first few hours just looking at the ingredients, the Strange book, and his own notes from Strange lessons. Lunawood, ever empathetic, found him there, her eyes wide with concern as she surveyed the worsening situation in the academy. Elias, are you all right? She whispered, noticing the strain etched on his face. I heard. Professor Strange gave you a special task. Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. He wants me to brew the counter potion, Lunawood. The one for everything. He gave me these impossible ingredients and told me to coax their essences into harmonious resonance, using my intuition. He threw his hands up in despair. My intuition, which, until a week ago, was telling me to give up potions entirely. Lunawood sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. But it's not telling you that now, is it? She said softly, her eyes twinkling with their usual insight. You felt it, haven't you? That spark Professor Strange talks about. That feeling when you know an ingredient. He wouldn't ask you if he didn't see it. Her words, simple and true, resonated deeply. She was right. He had felt it. That subtle hum, that connection. He picked up the feather of the astral crow, closing his eyes. He felt its vibrant, airy energy, a lightness that promised clarity. The heartstone shard was different, solid, grounding, yet with a pulsating rhythm like a slow heartbeat. The bloom of the verdant vale, though dried, still radiated a deep, nurturing earthiness. Harmonious resonance, he murmured. It's like a symphony of magic. Over the next day, Elias plunged into the brewing process with an intensity he'd never known. He didn't follow a traditional recipe. Instead, he experimented, guided by the almost musical hum of the ingredients' essences. He found himself adding minute amounts of distilled moo petal due to the feather, sensing its ethereal energy needed a gentle carrier. He crushed the heartstone shard with a specific, rhythmic pressure, intuiting that its grounding force required a deliberate, slow release. He steeped the bloom of the verdant vale in a concoction of pure spring water and sun-warmed clay, feeling its nurturing power needed to be drawn out slowly, patiently. He was making progress. He felt it. The initial chaos of the individual essences was slowly beginning to coalesce into a shimmering, hopeful melody within his cauldron. He was so engrossed, his focus absolute, that he barely registered the subtle shift in the air, the faint, lingering scent of a spell not quite banished. Seraphina Vance, her face a mask of determined professionalism, watched him from the shadows of the lab. Her initial dismissive scoff had morphed into a growing unease, then a simmering anger, as she saw Elias Thorne, actually making headway with Strange's ridiculous methods. She'd overheard Strange himself mention Elias's unique intuition in the faculty lounge, a betrayal of all she believed in. This wasn't magic. This was chaos masquerading as progress. If Elias succeeded, it would validate Strange and undermine everything Seraphina had worked for, everything the Academy stood for. She couldn't allow it. Her first attempt was subtle. While Elias was engrossed in a delicate stirring motion, his back to her, Seraphina deftly used a minor obscure ingredientis charm to subtly darken the label of a small jar next to Elias's workstation, a jar of powdered dragon scale, which carried a volatile, aggressive magical signature next to an identical jar of powdered griffin feather, which was essential for calming and balancing the brew. It was a simple swap of perception, easily correctable, but potentially disastrous for a brewer relying on visual cues. Elias, however, wasn't relying on visual cues anymore. As his hand reached for what he thought was the griffin feather, a discordant hum rippled through his senses. The dragon scale, even through the jar, screamed antagonism. He paused, frowning, and picked up the other jar, the true griffin feather, feeling its gentle, soothing hum. He looked between the two, then back at the slightly discolored label, a faint suspicion prickling at him. He chalked it up to his own fatigue, but the moment lingered. Undeterred, Seraphina tried again. Late that night, after Elias had left, she slipped into the lab. She didn't want to destroy his work outright. That would be too obvious, too easily traced. Instead, she performed a low-level Disruptus Etheris charm near his cauldron, a spell designed not to damage the physical potion, but to subtly interfere with its nascent magical bonds, to introduce a minute, almost undetectable instability that would cause it to fail later, perhaps even erupt violently when it was nearing completion. Elias returned the next morning, feeling a nervous excitement. His brew, now a shimmering, multi-layered liquid, pulsed gently in the cauldron. He dipped a testing vial into it, and a gentle wave of warmth spread through his palm. It felt right. Then he noticed a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air just above the cauldron, a phantom echo of magic that seemed out of place. He frowned, running his hand through the space, feeling a strange, subtle resistance, like pushing through thin, magical jelly. It made him uneasy, a dissonant note in his emerging symphony. He doubled down on his focus, pouring more of his own calming intent into the brew, trying to soothe away whatever unseen disturbance was there. Luna Wood, arriving to check on him, noticed his intense concentration. "What's wrong, Elias?" I don't know," he admitted, gesturing vaguely at the air above the cauldron. "I feel something. A kind of static. It's making the essences jittery." Luna Wood closed her eyes, extending her own empathetic senses. Her brow furrowed. "It's faint," she murmured, "but I feel it too. Like a discordant echo. Not from the ingredients. From outside." Her eyes flickered towards the lab's entrance, then back to Elias. Professor Strange would know. Elias shook his head. "I need to figure this out myself. He trusts me." The clock was winding down. The malady had intensified. Some students were now exhibiting uncontrolled bursts of magic, harmless but alarming. Elias felt the immense pressure. He needed to complete the potion, to counteract the lingering static, to bring his essences into perfect harmony. He was in the final, most delicate stage, infusing the coalesced essences with a precise, stabilizing burst of pure intent. He needed absolute focus, absolute clarity. He closed his eyes, his wand hovering over the shimmering surface, feeling the pulsing magic within. He sensed the underlying tremor, the lingering disruption, but pushed past it, channeling his newfound confidence, his desperate hope, into the brew. Just as he was about to unleash the final stabilizing burst, a sharp, metallic clang echoed through the lab. Elias's eyes snapped open. Seraphina stood by a shelf, a heavy grimoire having seemingly accidentally slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor with an ear-splitting thud, scattering dust and old parchment everywhere. Her face was a mask of feigned surprise, but her eyes, darting to Elias's cauldron, betrayed a desperate, almost manic intensity. The sudden noise, the jolt, caused a ripple in Elias's concentration. The magical energy he had gathered at the tip of his wand wavered, threatening to disperse. The delicate balance in the cauldron, almost perfect, almost complete, teetered on the brink of chaotic instability. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had mere seconds to recover, to salvage months of effort and the fate of his afflicted peers. He met Seraphina's gaze, seeing not just anger, but a chilling determination. This wasn't an accident. This was a direct, desperate attempt to make him fail. The potion pulsed erratically, its colors swirling dangerously. Elias knew, with an agonizing certainty, that if he faltered now, the entire brew would implode, likely taking a good portion of the lab with it. The air in the potions classroom crackled, not just with the usual heat from bubbling cauldrons, but with an almost tangible tension. Elias, his senses heightened by the peculiar magic of the nightshade leaves he was about to add, felt it like a hum beneath his skin. Seraphina Vance, her face a mask of determined fury, had just released a surge of chaotic energy aimed directly at his workstation. It wasn't a spell, not exactly, but a desperate, unrefined magical burst designed to destabilize, to spoil. But Elias was no longer the Elias of yesterday. Strange lessons, Lunawood's quiet encouragement, and the desperate plight of his peers had forged something new within him. His intuition, once a whispering ghost, now roared to life. He didn't see the energy, but he felt its trajectory, its intent. Just as the unstable magical current reached his cauldron, threatening to curdle the carefully balanced concoction, Elias acted. Without conscious thought, his wand hand moved, not to cast a counterspell, but to create a subtle, almost imperceptible eddy in the magical currents around his brew. He redirected Seraphina's raw magic, not nullifying it, but channeling it away, allowing it to harmlessly dissipate into the stone walls of the classroom. Seraphina stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock and a flicker of something akin to fear. She had expected to see chaos, failure, a justification for her rigid beliefs. Instead, Elias's cauldron continued its rhythmic, internal shimmer, utterly undisturbed. Professor Strange, who had been observing from a shadowed corner, offered a barely perceptible nod. Elias didn't notice. His focus was entirely on the brew. He held the nightshade leaves, not measuring them, but feeling their essence. He saw the network of tiny veins, sensed the cool, calming energy within them, the subtle interplay of light and shadow that held their mystical properties. His fingers, guided by instinct, separated precisely what was needed, the perfect quantum, neither too much nor too little. He dropped them into the opalescent liquid. A soft, ethereal thrum resonated through the cauldron. The liquid, previously a swirling silver, began to deepen, taking on the bruised, midnight blue hue of twilight just before dawn. Tiny, luminescent motes, like captured starlight, spun within its depths, each one a minuscule beacon of restorative energy. Elias closed his eyes, breathing deeply, letting the aromas wash over him, the earthy scent of moon petal root, the sharp tang of crystallized dragon's breath, and now, the subtle, calming sweetness of the nightshade. He wasn't just adding ingredients, he was weaving a tapestry of energy, a song of healing. Feel the resonance, Elias. Professor Strange's voice, a low rumble, seemed to echo from within Elias himself. Connect with the flow. Let the ingredients guide you, but remember your intent is the conductor. Elias opened his eyes, a strange clarity in their depths. He could feel the malady in the air, a faint, persistent ache that permeated Eldoria. He pictured the afflicted students, their magic dimming, their spirits fading. He poured his desire for their recovery, his empathy, his belief in his own burgeoning ability, into the brew. His wand, usually just a tool, now felt like an extension of his will, a conduit for his soul. He stirred, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence, clockwise, then counterclockwise, not following any specific ancient pattern, but letting the motion arise from the brew itself, a dance choreographed by the converging essences. The liquid thickened, then thinned, then pulsed with a steady, internal light, like a tiny, self-sustaining star. Meanwhile, news from the infirmary was dire. Matron Willow, a witch whose stoic demeanor usually belied her deep compassion, had sent for Professor Thorne, Elias's own father, the Transfiguration Master, his face etched with worry. More students were collapsing, their magical cores flickering like dying embers. Traditional healing spells and mundane remedies had proven useless. The faculty was at a loss, their faces grim in the flickering torchlight of the emergency meeting. They were running out of time. Back in the potions lab, Elias reached for the final ingredient, a single, iridescent scale from a dream serpent, a rare component known for its ability to stabilize fragmented magical energies. This was the linchpin, the element that would knit together the disparate energies and solidify the cure. He didn't drop it in. Instead, he held it aloft, his thumb brushing its cool, smooth surface. He focused, not on its chemical properties, but on its mystical essence, its dreamlike ability to connect and restore, its quiet power to soothe the fractured mind and soul. A faint hum emanated from the scale, resonating with the glowing potion below. Elias lowered it, not letting it fall, but guiding it gently to the surface of the brew. As it touched the liquid, it didn't dissolve. Instead, it seemed to melt into the potion, its iridescence spreading like a wave of pure, concentrated light, washing over the midnight blue liquid until the entire cauldron glowed with a shimmering, ethereal aurora. The air filled with a scent that was at once familiar and utterly new, the scent of hope, of resilience, of magic rekindled. "It is done," Elias whispered, his voice hoarse, but filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. Professor Strange stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He took a small ladle, scooped a sample, and brought it to his nose, then tasted a tiny drop. A slow smile spread across his usually impassive face. "Remarkable, Elias. Truly remarkable. The balance, the intent, it resonates with perfect harmony. This is not merely a potion. It is a magical symphony." Seraphina, still standing frozen, watched, her jaw slack. The complete lack of external ritual, the sheer intuitive grace Elias had displayed, shattered every one of her preconceived notions about potions. Her sabotage had not only failed, but had been effortlessly absorbed, like a ripple in a vast ocean. Without a moment's hesitation, Professor Strange levitated the entire cauldron, guiding it through the corridors of Eldoria Academy, Elias trailing behind, still a little dazed by the culmination of his efforts. They arrived at the infirmary, where a scene of quiet desperation unfolded. Students lay on cots, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. Professor Thorne, Elias's own father, the Transfiguration Master, his face etched with worry, was murmuring calming words to a young Ravenclaw. "Professor Thorne, Matron Willow," Strange announced, his voice cutting through the hushed despair, "Elias has completed the counter potion." All eyes turned to the glowing cauldron. Professor Thorne looked at his son, then at the iridescent liquid, a spark of cautious hope replacing the despair in his eyes. Matron Willow, ever practical, approached with a sterile vial. "How do we administer it, Professor Strange?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Just a few drops, directly," Strange instructed. "Its essence will seek out the imbalance." Elias, with a trembling hand, scooped the first dose. He approached Lunawood, who lay on a cot, her normally vibrant face pale and drawn. Her eyes fluttered open as Elias leaned close. "Lunawood," Elias whispered, his heart aching. "It's ready." He carefully administered a few drops. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer pulsed beneath Lunawood's skin. Her breathing deepened. A delicate, golden warmth spread across her face, chasing away the pallor. She stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Her eyes opened fully, their usual intelligent sparkle returning. "Elias," she murmured, a faint smile gracing her lips. What was that?" A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled his knees, washed over Elias. It worked. He felt a joyous surge of magic within himself, not a chaotic burst, but a steady, resonant power. Matron Willow moved swiftly, administering the potion to student after student. Each time, the same miraculous transformation occurred. The pale skin regained color, the shallow breaths deepened, the dull eyes reignited with life. Within minutes, the infirmary, once a somber hall of despair, began to stir with renewed energy, soft murmurs of recovery replacing the strained silence. Professor Thorne approached Elias, his gaze filled with a mixture of pride, relief, and a touch of awe. "Elias," he said, his voice thick with emotion, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. You truly did it. This is astounding." He looked at Strange, a silent apology and respect passing between the two professors. The faculty, who had gathered, exchanged disbelieving looks. They had seen magic, certainly, but this blend of quiet intent and profound efficacy was something new, something outside the traditional texts. Professor Strange merely offered a serene smile. Seraphina Vance, however, remained rooted to the spot, her expression a complex mixture of envy, disbelief, and a grudging respect that she fought desperately to suppress. Her world, built on rigid rules and established precedents, had just been irrevocably shaken. Elias, the struggling student, the one she had openly scorned, had achieved something she, with all her meticulous precision, could not even comprehend, let alone replicate. Elias looked at the recovering students, at Lunawood's gentle smile, at his father's proud gaze, and finally at Professor Strange, who merely winked. The heavy cloak of self-doubt that had stifled him for so long finally lifted, replaced by a radiant sense of belonging and purpose. He hadn't failed. He had simply been looking in the wrong direction. His magic wasn't broken. It was simply unique. He was not a rule follower, but an innovator, a mystic, an alchemist of intent. He had always felt the pressure to prove his magical worth, to fit into a mold that was never meant for him. Now, he didn't need to prove anything to anyone but himself. He had found his own magical style, blending scientific precision with an intuitive understanding of mystical energies, a path only Professor Strange had seen for him. This was his identity, his truth. The journey had been arduous, fraught with doubt and external opposition, but the destination was more fulfilling than he could have ever imagined. He was Elias Thorne, and he was a wizard, not despite his unconventional magic, but because of it. As the last student received their dose and the infirmary buzzed with the soft hum of returning vitality, Professor Strange turned to Elias, a knowing look in his eye. "A truly remarkable feat, Elias," he said, his voice carrying just enough for only Elias to hear. "But this is merely the beginning. The world of magic is vast, and there are many more mysteries to unravel, many more songs for your alchemist's heart to compose. And I suspect, my young mystic, that this counter potion you've brewed, it may yet have more secrets to reveal, secrets that could shape the very foundations of Eldoria itself." The implication hung in the air, a thrilling challenge. Elias felt a thrill, not of fear, but of anticipation. He had found his path, and it was leading him to places he had never dared to dream. The future, once a daunting unknown, now shimmered with endless possibilities.